We're excited to have Taylor Pochron talk about plant propagation. And I will be here to help filter any questions. If you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A. We might stop here and there to answer some of your questions, but we'll reserve the majority of them to the end of the presentation. Thanks everybody for joining us, and Taylor, take it away.
Yay. Thank you, Jen. All right. So I am very excited for this class, as we were speaking about earlier. Plant propagation is something that is near and dear to me because it's something I'm constantly doing all the time. Every day of the year, at all times, I have plant propagation projects going on in different parts of my house, in different areas, on windowsills, on all my counters, on random bookshelves, by my other plants or by themselves. So it's something that is consistently happening because I am growing, and as plants grow, they of course get bigger. And at that point, you can either chop them back and compost what you have, or if you chop them back many times, you can actually just propagate them and then you get more plants. And it's so hard not to just get more plants. It is very, very fun. It's something that I enjoy doing, and I like to fill in spaces around me with live growth. So that's kind of just my thing. And a lot of you, I'm guessing, are as well plant people who would love to have some more plants around the area. Just to think about, actually, when you're listening to this class, think about why you would want to propagate plants, because there's a lot of different reasons, and the main one is to get more of them, of course, because that's what it is. You're creating many from few. But also think about, are you doing it so you can have more house plants to fill in around your house? Are you doing it so you can make gifts for your friends or your family to actually produce more of them? Sometimes even some plants can look a little bit sparse in their pots. They have one or two stems sticking out of the pot and they grow really long. And if you can cut them back, make more of them, and then put them back into the same pot and make a nice, really full arrangement, you can really like bring life and bring volume to your existing plants already without really reducing your space as well. So it's a really helpful tip, and just a helpful thing to do whenever you're trying to just kind of create more foliage and more healthy looking, robust looking plants. Every picture that you're going to be seeing throughout today's presentation is ones from my collection. There's a couple from the store, but pretty much they're all stuff that I've been doing. They're all around me right now. I can probably point to half the plants in this presentation just within arm's reach of myself. So they're all very near and dear to me. They all have their own story. They all have their own kind of learning experience that I've gone through. And of course, we always say that we're like the experts or we're the ones who know everything, but we absolutely don't. And we're learning it constantly. Over the past couple of years, I've really been taking care of plants. I've learned so much more. So this is just part of that step. And I'm hoping that you can take a little bit from me, you can learn a little bit yourself, maybe even come back to one of the stores and talk with us and tell us your experiences, because I use that to actually learn and share going forward. So let's get right into it. Just as a little point on this page, I do really enjoy this big plant right here. It's a Rhaphidophora hei. It's one of my favorite plants nowadays because it just has this really cool shingly growing up a log or growing up a tree kind of look. And it's one of the ones that I successfully propagated through chopping up the top and putting it into some new containers. And it's one that's very much near and dear to me. It's actually right back there. It's just a really cool kind of way of just showing that there are so many different types of propagation styles and ways to do it. So let's get into it. The first slide I kind of want to go towards is still being very broad. Let's kind of pull back and look at it as a what kind of propagations are there? There's sexual propagation and there's asexual propagation. And this is really what you can imagine. Sexual propagation are spores and seeds, mainly seeds. There's not that many spores, it's just kind of ferns out there. But seed propagation is what drives the world. It's what drives all of our food. It's what drives all of like the production of so many different plants across the world. And it is still propagation. You can think about it that everything that we are doing to create more of something, create more humans through reproduction, we create more plants through sexual and asexual propagation. We have all the fungus, all the bacteria, everything goes through that kind of change. And so it's what drives our natural world. And we're kind of trying to now bring that down into a very specific topic of plants. So I just want to at least give you the more broad spectrum of sexual propagation. And that when you have a seeds or spores, you're making more genetically diverse species and genetically diverse offspring, because they are the genes are being mixed up and they're being made, and the gametes are kind of producing these new organisms that are very similar but a little bit the same or a little bit different than their original parents. Where asexual propagation is really what we're going to be talking about today because it's what more people want to know about for plant propagation. It is where you're reproducing through vegetation. So you're taking um, stems or leaves or root systems and actually producing more of that plant through a piece of the plant. And that produces a mostly identical organism to the host parent, which then produces more and more of these really cool, really interesting growth styles without going some crazy genetics kind of getting in the way. But we're talking, again, we're going to be talking about mostly asexual propagation. We have some awesome seed classes. We even have our seed potato class. But we also have a bunch of just like normal seed classes in our register. So you can definitely go back and check out all those on our YouTube page. But today we're talking about actual plant propagation through like cuttings and stuff. The first actually one, instead of cuttings, we're going to talk about division. So there are many ways to propagate, and I think division is one of the easiest ones to kind of grasp your head around because it really is just splitting up your plant, right? Is you have a cluster where you have a nice robust plant and you're like, oh wow, it's amazing looking, but it's kind of large, or maybe I don't need it that big in that area, or don't want so many of them, or it's growing out some pups or roots or clusters, and you want to actually separate them out and then just start growing them themselves. The best thing about division propagation is you have root systems already attached. You have your roots, you have your leaves, most likely you have your stems if that's the kind of plant it is. And that means that that plant is pretty much immediately ready to go and start growing and start getting bigger. So there's not a lot of fuss or not a lot of different techniques you have to worry about other than the actual splitting and the event of severing root systems or cutting off pups, which is what's actually the most difficult about this for a lot of people to kind of grasp because everyone is worried about hurting the plant or causing damage or having a transplantation shock. And it's very valid to have that kind of feeling because it is something that will happen to a plant if you are not careful with it or if you're being a little bit too aggressive with your separation, as well as it's just something that can kind of happen. It's something you can completely avoid. Whenever you're doing any kind of propagation, especially with division, there's a chance that your plant is going to have a bit of a dieback, maybe lose a few leaves, get some yellowing leaves, maybe not be as happy for a season or so. But that's just the nature of growth and change. And so it's not something you stay away from completely, but just be a little bit more mindful of. In this picture, I have a nice Sansevieria. It's actually one I've showed before, and it's just showing that it has this pup kind of coming up from the base and going to start a whole new cluster of Sansevieria leaves coming out of the ground right there. And that's something that can pretty easily be just isolated and popped off, as well as each of these little clusters of Sansevieria leaves right here are pretty easy to just you can take your hands with your fingers kind of going through the root systems, or a nice sharp scissor when you find the key points where you can separate them. It's just wherever the roots are completely attached to each other, you will have to cut those, but generally they have their own root structures, so it's pretty easy to separate these kinds of plants out. Sansevierias, many kinds of succulents, many kind of clustered plants. Even right over here, we have this Neanthobella palm right here that is very, very packed into its container. And we sell beautiful packed plants because it makes a really nice impact for your house if you have something that's really full looking. But sometimes maybe you want that plant to be 3 plants and you want it to be half the size because you have a couple spaces that are a little bit smaller. You can actually go in there pretty carefully, depending on how impacted and how root bound those roots are. You can come in and separate them out, sever a few of them, and actually produce more plants. And then, as you see at the base of these plants right here, there are a lot of little stems kind of coming up from the ground because that is the palm producing more of its stalks, and it will just get bigger and get larger from that. So you are starting at a small kind of plant, and it actually grows out. Another really cool one we have right down here are the Pelea peperomoides, the quite popular money plant that we had for many years now. It's just been growing in popularity and kind of swaying into that. But the one thing that's really amazing about these plants is it produces babies and pups like no else. It is so good at making plants for your friends or for cutting. So right here at the base, you can see there's the main stalk and then some little baby shoots coming out. This is one that I grew a couple years ago, and I was so surprised by how many pups I was able to pull out of them, and they were super easy. They were just little stems at the very base in the soil, and I just picked them out. They had a little root system already attached. It was very no fuss. It didn't seem like it was ripping anything out of the plant very much, and I was able to put those right into some water. Some of them I was with that had bigger root systems, I was able to put into the soil already, and I just grew them immediately, gave them away as like some gifts during one of the time of the year. It was a really great experience to have this plant that can produce these little clusters of little pups that I was able to separate out. And then lastly, right here we have the ananas, which is the pineapple, which is an amazing plant to grow. We actually can grow it in our houses. It is a type of bromeliad, so a lot of people are so surprised when they see a pineapple growing in the store, and they're like, "Wait, is this actually one?" And you said, "Yeah, it's edible. It's one that you can actually produce your own pineapples if you have the time and the patience for it." And the cool thing about it is they produce all these little pups coming out the side of the plant really easily. Actually, I think I have it right here, one of the pups that I pulled off of it earlier today or yesterday, I guess. And it is something that you can take apart. It's a tillandsia, so it can either be more of an air plant, or you can also put it into some soil because it has a bit of a terrestrial kind of capability. But it's just showing that this plant likes to multiply through these kind of pups, and then you can actually sever them and divide them and get more plants. Now, another thing I want to talk about with division is the idea that you can only split things that are able to be split, which is, I know, a pretty obvious statement, but I have two types of ferns right here. I have this really nice white paw fern, which is a type of rabbit's foot fern that a lot of people know. I think a very hardy, amazing fern that can propagate so easily because its main thing is it produces awesome root structures. And so its capability of producing these really cool terrestrial kind of rhizomal root structures, and then also having the roots underneath them, it's very easy to go in there using your scissors or using your snips or even some like nice gentle hand motions. You can actually break them apart and separate them into multiple pieces. So this is the one piece right here, a 4-inch that we sell in our store. I split it into 3 little pieces right down here, each of them having their own little root structure, their own leaf structure, all ready to go. And the thing you want to be careful of when you are dividing a plant up is try and make sure you give enough roots to enough of the foliage. If you split it up and you have one piece that has all the beautiful foliage because you're like, wow, look how amazing this is, but then a tiny little root system attached to it, and then the other piece that has all the roots and just a little bit of foliage on it, they're going to grow very differently. The one that has all the foliage has too much an imbalance of energy. The leaves on top are taking too much from the root system that can't provide it. So it's going to actually suffer and probably die back a fair bit. The one that actually has the full root system and a small amount of leaves, it'll probably do fine. It'll be a little bit slower at first, and it'll probably actually reproduce and grow pretty fast, but you are kind of detrimenting the other piece that you took off. So when you are separating them out, try and have a fair bit of equal proportions of root structure that you are separating from the plant. And then over here on the side, I just want to show off, this is a really cool bird's nest fern. They're a wonderful type of fern to grow if you have an area that is partial sun or some lower light, but maybe not too dark. But it comes in a cluster right here, but the cluster is pretty much all attached to one root system. So if you were to come in and try and sever that, it would be pretty hard for the plant to actually reproduce and be as happy. I'm sure it would be capable because plants are quite adaptive and pretty amazing. But in this case, you would want to have a plant that has multiple of these root clusters or just plant clusters in the pot that you can separate from each other rather than trying to separate the main one. So if you find a plant, you come to the store and you're looking at a really cool tree or ficus or something, and it has one stalk or one stem or one area where it's attached to the root system, those ones you can't really propagate through division. But if you have ones that have multiple, then it's definitely up for game. Just got to be a little careful. So that's talk about division. If you have some more questions about that, definitely think about it going forward. We can talk about it later. But I think it's probably the more easier to grasp and understand part of propagation for plants. And there are many different plants that can actually use this style. So let's talk really fast about soil mediums. I know we're going to split up our different kinds of propagations with this soil, but it's a really important thing to talk about, and not even soil mediums, actually growing mediums. So growing mediums are what the plant actually can grow in, what the roots are growing in. And it's very important to understand what you are growing your plant in because it can actually change the physical applications or the physical structures of the actual plant. So we all know soil right here at the very top. You can grow many plants in soil, most plants in general, and you can propagate in soil. And I'll actually show you some different ways of utilizing some hormones to actually make it a little bit easier. But it is more of the end result. A lot of times you want to transplant all your propagations into soil in the end, and not so much start in it, just because there's a lot of things that happen in soil. There's a lot of organic matter, there's lots of minerals, there's lots of biomaterials, all those different kinds of things are are great for the plant and all, but also can add a lot of variables to the system where you're trying to just grow your root system on your little cutting or whatever you're doing. And putting in the soil can be a little bit more tricky or a little bit more variable. Whereas if you have sphagnum moss, water, and perlite, these are single ingredient propagation mediums. So these are ones where you are putting your structure or your plant into something that doesn't have a whole bunch of things going on, and you can actually focus on just growing the root system and maybe applying some sort of fertilizer or some sort of hormone to actually help it along the way. I much prefer water and sphagnum moss in general. I don't use perlite quite often, but I do want to show it off because a lot of different kinds of growers and people who do mass reproductions and mass propagation projects tend to use perlite just because it's a really nice inert material that you can add your fertilizers in, you can add your soil, you can watch your water. It's very reusable. It's a wonderful little substance that we also use in all of our potting soils as well. But I mainly use sphagnum moss and water just because I find it to be easier for a couple different reasons. Sphagnum moss is a sponge-like material. So it is a moss structure that is grown in different kinds of bogs. Everyone's kind of hearing a little bit more about sphagnum moss. There's a little bit of controversy here and there about it, but we're just going to talk about the material itself. It is very water retentive, so it has that sponge-like material. It actually kind of soaks up the water really easily and holds it for a little while, and that allows the plant to actually draw water from it really easily as well. It can hold the nutrients because if the nutrients are dissolved in the water, it actually can hold all that inside its little structure. It has some actually pretty great drainage. For having so much water retention, water can move through sphagnum moss quite easily, especially when it's a little bit wet. You can pour a glass of water onto sphagnum and it will just kind of run all the way through the systems, fill up all the pores that it can, and then run out without getting bogged up or really just like holding all the water, which can be a little bit detrimental to root structures because the main thing that roots need other than water is oxygen. And we don't think about that too much is that plants need oxygen, but they very much do. All replication, which happens, which is just like, we have photosynthesis, which is all your energy, but then replication is your cells growing and getting bigger, require oxygen to do. So a lot of times you need to make sure that there is good drainage so that the air can get through and get into your root systems. Sphagnum moss also is a little bit on the lower on the pH scale, making it a little bit more acidic, and it actually has some pretty good antimicrobial properties. It's hard to say how much that is, but it is shown in many different studies that sphagnum moss has a good amount of antimicrobial areas that you can really stop like fungal stuff or bacterias from growing excessively inside of it. So it makes a really nice potting medium to just grow in general. That's why we have all of our orchids inside of it and some of our other kinds of staghorn ferns and things mounted on walls. People use sphagnum moss for a lot of these projects because of all these different properties that it has. And it's quite easy to handle and touch. It's soft, it's squishy, it's pretty fun to play with. It's not a kind of a hard time. It's not spiky. It's not anything that's going to give you splinters or anything like that. It's a fun one to work with. Now, water is water, right? We all know what it is. It's amazing. It's running our world. It's running everything we have. And we all understand the properties of water. We've been drinking it since the day we were born. But it is a wonderful place for plants to grow into because it is very visible. You can see your roots growing. You can see the whole interaction happening. You can see if there's a buildup of microbes, if there is moss growing, or if there is a clean system going on. It's very visible. It also is really good for short-term or long-term propagation. So sometimes you just need to throw your cutting into a glass of water and deal with it tomorrow because you have a lot of things going on and you already cut your plant because you're in the mood to cut your plants, but you're not in your mood to actually fully put them into a propagation system. So you can cut it, you can put in water, it actually holds it. It allows the plant to continue to pull up water through its cell systems without breaking down or dying off. As well as if you have a good, if you have a good amount of water that is, full of oxygen, full of all of the different kinds of like little minor minerals, if you have some fertilizer in there, it actually is really nice area thing for the plant to grow into. And it's the bare minimum for a plant to grow. If you have water and some sunlight, in general, your plant will grow. So it's why it makes a great propagation medium. So let's go on to actually talk about a little bit more plants because that's what this class is about and everyone wants to see some cool pictures of plants. Let's talk about propagations through cuttings. This is the main chunk of today's talk because this is what everyone wants to know about of what's the little methods of how to actually cut them, how to put them into whatever propagation system you're using, how to transplant them, all those kinds of questions we can start answering right now. So this is a really simple example using the Epiprimnum aureum, the marble queen. It's probably my favorite of the pothos just because of how fast it grows. It has an awesome variegation on its leaves. It's nice and bright green, but with some kind of cool color interest. And it is one of the fastest ones I can propagate out of everything else I have in my collection. So I have a propagation kit right here. We sell them in our stores. They're kind of fun. It's just showing that you can have little tubes of water, you can have little jars of water, you can have a vase of water, a cup, a bowl, whatever vessel can hold water can hold your plant in it as well. But in this case, you have a little kind of cute system that you can write a little tag on or put some labels or just have it on the side of your shelf that you can grow your plant into and actually see the roots growing out of it. I have a trimming from one of my epiprimnums that has just been hanging in my room for a good while. They grow pretty fast, so you can just find a nice cutting every once in a while. And I wanted to show off that it has multiple sections to it. So right here at the very back of the cutting, there are no leaves. There's even some brown leaves. I left them on because I wanted to show you the whole process. You have leaves die back. It's totally normal. And right back here, you have all these little nodes going through it with no leaves on them. You have some nice nodes in the middle section that have some nice big bright leaves. And then we have the very tip end section that is the meristem where the new growth is coming out of. And each of those different areas can be propagated, but they're a little bit different and they grow a little bit at different rates, and you just kind of have to understand what's going on. So I'll show you some more pictures soon about the different amount of nodes you can have within the propagation. But in these ones, I have, 3 or 4. It's actually a fair bit. You can have 1 node for propagation. You can have 2. You can have 10. I think a smaller amount is generally better because first you get more propagations out of your piece, as well as it's not throwing too much energy into one growth point. It's not you don't have one root system growing out and then there's just all this energy is relying on that one root system to grow. So I think cutting them up into smaller chunks is always better for a propagation system. You want to snip off the excess leaves. So if you have a long stem and there's leaves going all the way up it. And like I was saying, if you have that one root system you have in your water that's going to try and grow its roots out, it's relying all of its roots or all the energy is coming from that one root system to provide for all those leaves that are now already in their production mode, ready to take up nutrients from their big, robust root system that you just cut them from. So it's better if you can actually take off some of the excess leaves to reduce the amount of need that the top of the plant needs from the bottom of the plant as it grows out. So I have in this picture right here showing that I cut off about 2 or 3 of the root systems at the bottom of each of my or sorry, not root systems, 2 or 3 of the leaves at the bottom of each of my cuttings. So first off, they fit inside this propagation system. It's a space thing as well. These little tubes are kind of small, so I couldn't stuff a leaf into her. But also it allows them to focus on just growing the root system out of that root node. And then I also have right over here on this right side, I'm showing that 1 or 2 of the stems have no leaves on them, and one of the stems is the very top of the meristem of the plant. And I find that the meristem piece or the cutting that has the leaf that is already growing will be incredibly quick compared to any other propagation you have. That is because immediately the plant can grow out of that top meristem where that leaf is starting and just get going. It can just start growing. It's already in the process. It's ready to go. Compared to one that maybe doesn't have some leaves, or even if it has some leaves, it still is cut at the top. That meristem's gone. It's not going to just immediately grow out of that cut point. It's not going to immediately just grow out of that leaf. It actually has to grow a new stem and leaf structure coming out of this little root node area, or it's just a node in general. You actually have to grow a whole new stem, which takes a lot of energy and takes time. So if you have a cutting that is a full cutting where both sides are cut off, it's going to take a lot longer than where it's one side cut off and the top is already growing. Just keeping that in mind when you make your propagations, make your cuts. So I grew these in water. This is something that I have actually right behind me. I do this all over my house, on my windowsills, anywhere that gets a nice bright amount of light. You don't want it to be in the dark because it needs the photosynthesis. But you also don't really want it to be right in the blazing window or somewhere where it's too hot, just because you can burn your leaves. They're a little bit tender. They don't have a full root system to kind of support them through the process. as well as they tend to evaporate. So water evaporates as it does, and also gets transpiring being pulled through the plant. And if your water level goes down very quickly because it's very hot in its area or the plant is pulling up a lot of water, then it goes dry. And if a root system stays dry for too long, then it kind of dies back. And then that whole propagation process that you just went through is pretty much null. You lose a lot of your progress. You have to start over. You may have to cut it again. You might just have to get rid of the cutting if you let it dry out for too long. So it's always good to keep an eye on your water sources, make sure that they are at a good level. They're going to go down and up every couple of days. So just put it in a space that you can actually look at it every day. All right. I have a nice big slide here that everyone just kind of looks at for a second. This is spotting the nodes. So when you are walking around your house or walking around the store or wherever you're looking at a plant, I always look for where are the growth nodes? Where are the leaves? Are there little root systems attached to those leaves? Or is it just a stem? How that will show me how easy it will be to propagate. All the plants within this picture are really good propagation plants because I can for almost all of them, see a little root node right where the leaves are going to come out, or leaves were before, a little area for a new root to pop out. Even on this little one right down here, that's the Shidia, there is a little tiny nubs kind of coming out of each of these structures right beneath each of the leaves, which is where the roots will grow out because these are generally, they're kind of what you consider aerial roots, the roots that can grab moisture from the air, but they're also there to help the plant grab onto things. A lot of these plants are climbers, or we call them trailers, but they really want to climb. They want to go up a tree or go up some sort of material to actually get higher and get, as much sun as they possibly can. So these root systems are actually there to both grab in nutrients and water, but also stick to things and allow the plant to grow upwards. So it's producing them on each of the leaf nodes. That's what allows it to actually kind of keep on growing as it grows up. But that makes it very easy for us to come in and chop on either side of them and actually just be able to propagate it because that area has already a root node growing. So it's going to be very easy for it to keep on growing. I have right here is a type of peperomia that has not so many, not like a very visible root node, but you can see where it would pop out right here, just these little tiny bumps that's going on. It'll pop out right there. Whereas this one is again, the pothos that we were talking about. And it has 1, 2, 3, 4, all these little root nodes, even between the leaf nodes, there's even some more root nodes. Oops. Showing that this plant will probably be very quick to propagate no matter where you cut it. It'll work out. We have on this side a nice type of orchid, which produces a lot of aerial roots. We all know orchids have those crazy little crawling roots that grow on top of their system. So if you ever have a area that you would like to grow an orchid, you can definitely propagate them through cuttings or through kikis, which are their little division points that you can actually pull them apart. So if you see roots, you can generally grow it. And then down at the bottom, we have a burro's tail, which is like the succulent that actually has the hanging succulent. They are ones that they lose their little leaves very easily. If you touch them, they'll just fall off. So you have to be very careful with them. But on each of those points where a leaf is a potential for roots to grow out of it. You can even see here little root systems starting to try to grow out to find some soil or find some nice moisture and actually get growing again. So this plant, if I came in and just chopped it right at the very top or at a few of these little points, I could put it right into soil right away and it would probably grow because succulents are amazing. And I have a slide about that later that we can talk about some succulents. And then this last one is a nice stem going all the way up of begonia that I'm actually going to show you in a little bit as well, that you can come in. And although there's no root systems growing already, they are set to go with all that the cells are ready to actually produce their both roots, stems, leaves, all that stuff. That's called being totipotent. So totipotency is something that plants have over many other organisms in this world because it is when all their cells have the capability of becoming any kind of root structure within a plant. It is why we can take small cuttings of leaves and produce a whole plant from it. It is why we can have a root system that is pretty small or not really anything attached to it, and a whole plant can grow out of it. It's why we can take tissue samples from begonias and grow whole begonias from a tissue sample. It's an amazing system that, similar to how humans have stem cells within parts of our body, plants have stem cells or their totipotent cells throughout their entire system. And it's why they have this amazing capability of vegetative propagation. All right, let's talk about one of the most successful ways I've found propagating, because I use water all the time. It's very easy. I put my plants in little jars of water all over my house, but I found that using transparent boxes for a propagation box. And you've probably seen this in different kinds of people recommending it across the plant verse. They're an amazing system that actually creates a very controlled environment. So it's an area where you have your plants, you have your soil, you can control the water, you control the nutrients, you can control the light because you can actually move it around. So it's a very controlled environment to allow the plant to have high humidity. And humidity is very great for root growth because that just means moisture's in the air. Anywhere the plant is, it can just grow some roots out and actually grab some moisture either out of the air or out of the soil. So having high moisture, high humidity environment is wonderful for propagation and plant growth, especially these very tropical plants that love to be in a very moist environment. You know, if you were going to the tropics or the Caribbean or something like that, where you have very high amount of light in that area, it's because so much humidity is causing all those plants to really have a lot of moisture available to them, and they grow really well. Nice thing about a transparent box, light passes through it. You can actually put a lid on top of it to increase that humidity, and light can actually get through it and hit your plants. You know, it's not perfect because you're still having a bit of a barrier, but it is enough light to actually get them to grow. They have those built-in lids. So if you can find these boxes at any of your container stores that you like to go to, I've just found them randomly all over the place. I find the ones that I like the most, nice and rigid, you know, long-lasting ones, but with a good clear lid on them. They're very easy to clean and reuse. I've used the same propagation box multiple times just because I can just take out the plants that I've propagated already, wash it in the sink, start again, immediately get going. So it's a nice, easy to use system, very clean, and they're pretty inexpensive. You can find a Tupperware in any store across this kind of crazy capitalist world. So you can find all these different kinds of things that you have available to you. These are some nice pictures I hope you've been looking at where we have some really pretty different kinds of pothos of different varieties that then right here, I wanted to show off. I used single cut propagation, so single growth points. I find that's the easiest and the most effective inside a propagation box. When you have a glass jar or some sort of glass and you have a plant sitting in it, it's kind of hard to do one cut for or one node for propagation just because it's small and it's kind of sideways and it doesn't really fit in there and the leaves are now submerged. But when you have a propagation box and it's only a shallow amount of moss on the bottom or whatever growing medium you're using, I do suggest moss, you actually can just put one piece of the plant, one leaf with one little stem and one little root node in each of the areas in the box, and it will grow out. You can see right here, all these ones have roots going all the way down. Right here as well. Single cut propagations, all these roots going all the way down. And that allows the plant to actually grow out. You get a lot of them very quickly. And then you can just grow your collection pretty fast. I really enjoy these kinds of propagation boxes. And like I was saying before, I use sphagnum moss because I find it to be one of the best growing mediums for roots in general. But I also totally avoid soil. Soil, again, has all these different microbes and all these different organisms inside of it already, and all these things that can break down and decompose, that it's very easy for it to get kind of gross. It smells bad. It produces these compounds that are anaerobic. It can kill off root systems. So if you're using a system that is like a propagation box with no drainage, nowhere for the water to go, tend to use a more sterile and more not soil-based propagation medium, and you'll have a lot better time with your little cuttings that you have growing. Right down here, one last little one. I have a Hoya here that I've actually had in this box for probably more than 2 years now, which is kind of bad. I should probably propagate it or plant it into a container, but sometimes you just don't have time. And it's growing quite fine. I've been giving it some fertilizer every once in a while. You can see little root systems on the bottom of the box kind of growing around. It's quite happy. I'm going to transplant it soon. I swear. So it's just showing that they can be in these boxes for a long period of time or a pretty short period of time and just get them going and plant them up. All right.
Taylor, can I
Yeah.
hop in here for a sec while you're on containers? A couple things. One, do you punch holes in the container anywhere? And two, do you ever use charcoal to help neutralize any water in them?
Ooh, very good questions. So I don't tend to find myself punching holes into the boxes just because a lot of times you don't want to punch holes in the bottom because I kind of want the moisture to be there. I want the actually to be able to pour the water into the box and have it be its own little system and not have it dripping on my counter. I can absolutely see punching holes into the tops of the boxes if you like to have a lid on it at all times, or you are stacking them or something like that. Punching holes into like the tops or areas where it allows some air transfer is very good because you don't want to keep these like hermetically sealed. You don't want to have a sealed box because yes, it'll do be okay for a while, but it is pretty fast for it to become anaerobic. And when something is anaerobic means there's no oxygen in the area. It is how you get those bacteria and those molds and so those things that thrive in that environment and they'll just eat away and kill off your plants. So I will always, in a way, kind of burp the boxes in some sort of sense, where I will lift up the lids and let some nice air go into them, or I'll put the lid on a little bit half cocked, or I will just not have the lid on it for a little while, for a couple of weeks, and then put the lid back on to kind of just give a little bit of humidity. I think actually having holes in the top of the box will kind of solve that problem without you having to fuss with it and change it around. So I think it's a great idea. It just requires you to be able to punch some holes into some plastic. So I think that's a great question. And then the charcoal use, I think is actually something very helpful, and I do use it quite often. I don't know a whole bunch about the full properties of using charcoal and really what it does in the long term, but I do know that it can neutralize both smells and the growth of some bacterias and different kinds of microbial things that you don't want. We use it in terrariums quite often. We use it in I use it in some of my soil mixes for plants that I know I'm going to keep wet for a long period of time or they really need to be moist for a while. So I'll throw charcoal in there too. I think it's a great idea. And you just don't want to you don't need a lot in there. You just need some pieces in the bottom, spread them around. They won't do anything bad for the plant. So I think an activated charcoal or like a nursery charcoal is something you want to use. It's totally fine. Yeah. All right. So let's move on to another big topic that is part of propagation and is using growing hormones. So hormones are something that is in all of us, and it's in all living things that we use to regulate different kinds of processes within our body. And rooting hormone is something that we use a lot for propagation. It's something that we are applying to the root system or to the growth nodes or the water or whatever it is to help stimulate that root growth. It gets all those little capillary roots starts growing really fast. It helps produce more of them. It keeps them a little bit more robust. And the two main ones that we sell in our store that I use consistently, both of them for different reasons, are rooting powder and tapping roots. So rooting powder is it's a synthetic material. It is this chemical compound right here that is something that you can put onto the plant's stems or root systems to then plant into some sort of soil or some sort of rooting medium. You want to use rooting powder when you are actually physically planting it into something. You don't really want to put it into rooting powder and then put the stem into water because it will just kind of wash off and won't be as effective. It needs to be very localized. The rooting powder has to be on the actual stem or on the root node for it to really affect the growth area. Rooting powder is a lot more precise. So it's really good for large project root propagations, or if you're trying to make sure that something happens in a certain way, it's very repeatable. It's a very like stable chemical that is used. So you can actually know what's going to happen when you use the rooting powder. Um, and like I said, you want to apply it to your cuttings right away. I have right here a geranium, one of those scented geraniums that I had outside. And I cut that plant up because I had a huge one. They grow very quickly. I cut it all the way up, and put little pieces, dip them onto the rooting hormone, place them into this container right here. And I have about 3 of them in my backyard now growing again about a year later. So it's very easy to use. You can use rooting powder on lots of both outdoor plants and indoor plants. And it's a nice one just to have in your arsenal. It's very inexpensive. It's quite handy to have. Again, then we now have Taproots. So Taproots is a company that we've been working with for a long time. They're incredible for the product that they make. They do make a bloom food fertilizer as well as a more natural, like organic, high nutrient fertilizer, as well as a few other things in their repertoire. But the main one and the mainstay for their product is the natural all seasons plant fertilizer, which is a little bit less of a full fertilizer, but it is a rooting hormone. It uses willow bark extract and kelp extract as its main components. And the main thing you want to look at is the willow bark extract is a natural source of rooting hormone that plants produce. And honestly, you could take a willow branch, like just a natural willow branch you have in the wild, and stick that into water, and it will produce its own rooting hormone for any other plants you put into it. So it's actually a very useful natural source of this growth hormone that we are now kind of bottling up and utilizing in our houses. The only thing about it is It's a little bit more kind of variable. You know, the rooting powder is a little bit more precise, but the rooting hormone, you know, can give you kind of varied amount of success depending on the plant you're using. It does have a broad range of benefits, though. The nice thing about tapping roots in general is with the willow bark extract and also the kelp extract and a few other little components that they have inside there, it does provide a little bit of nutrients here and a little bit of antimicrobial help there. And it gives it some beneficial kind of bacterias and stuff like that. So it actually helps the plant in a lot of different ways that really do help the root system grow in general, as well with the willow bark extract, which is just an incredibly helpful resource that we have at our disposal. The thing about taproot roots is it is a liquid. So you cannot just, you can dip your plant into it, but it won't really do very much. If you soak your cuttings inside of it and then plant them, that can work pretty well because you're at least letting it soak in and apply that rooting hormone. Or this is what I mainly use whenever I do water propagation. I will put a small droplet of this inside my little water container. I'm not that fussy about how much or how many teaspoons or like that. Just a little drop of it inside a small container of water for your propagation, and it goes a long way. And the best thing about that is once that system is ready to be emptied out, because you should kind of clean and empty out your propagation water pretty consistently. You don't have to completely empty it out, but you consistently want to kind of, you know, refresh it. You can use that water for your other plants. It has good nutrients inside of it. It has some rooting hormone. It'll be totally fine for just some of your normal planted plants around your house. Both of these products, they utilize the plant's hormone auxin, and auxin is something I've talked about before. It's a really cool plant hormone that actually causes the plant to grow its stems and grow itself out. It is how the plant knows to grow, technically. It's pretty complicated hormone in general, but it is really helpful and it's something that I would love to learn more about, to be honest. It's an amazing kind of hormone to utilize in this plant world. And the other thing I wanted to mention here, I don't actually have on the slide, is a lot of plants, like the one we were just talking about 2 or 3 ago, the Epiprimnum aureum has been shown to actually have natural rooting hormone in it as well. And I don't know too much about this, and I would love to do a little bit more research, but actually having a cutting of this inside your water will be producing its own rooting hormone as well to help itself root and other plants. So if you have a whole bunch of cuttings that you're struggling with and maybe you don't have any tapping roots around, throw a piece of a pothos inside there. It might actually help it along to get some roots growing. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about using that hormone in another example. We have a Begonia maculata here, which was another very popular plant that everyone really wanted. They were quite beautiful. It's the polka dot begonia. They produce these amazing leaves that have these little spots all over them. They produce some really cool flowers. Begonias are a little bit more difficult, and honestly, out of all the plants I grow, I struggle with them the most, but I still keep on growing them because they're so beautiful and I want to get better at it. But in this case, I actually had a Begonia maculata that grew up really tall. It had leaves going all the way up and they slowly died back from the base. And I thought, you know, this is a little bit tall. I have all these empty root nodes. Let's see what I can do with it. And I wanted to propagate it. So a little while ago, I took a scissor and I came in and I chopped up a few pieces. I think I maybe did a cutting where I took 2 to 3 root nodes and I cut on either side of them. And then after I snipped them, I dipped them in some rooting powder. Honestly, put a little bit of rooting powder in another container and dip it in that is a more safety conscious kind of way of doing it. But I dipped it right into the container because we were going with it live. And then you put that into your little grow box or whatever kind of material you're growing to. I found the grow box to be really helpful. Begonias like humidity. They like a lot of humidity. So I find that if I can have a little container that has a lid on top of it, it was going to work a lot better, I was hoping. And then another little tip I have right here that you can do with some plants, if you have a very large leaf, you know how I mentioned before, cutting off some of the leaves to help reduce the amount of energy that the plant needs on top to allow the root system to grow on bottom. If you have a very large leaf and it's not going to both fit in your box as well as it's just a lot of energy on top of that little root node that you just cut off, you can cut back the leaf. I took my scissor and I cut all the way around, snip these leaves in half or in thirds to allow the plant to have less foliage to have to deal with, but still enough to produce some photosynthesis. And it worked quite well. These ones, I was able to grow roots pretty fast. I was able to get them going. And here are the 2 results I had pretty recently. So when I planted them up, I dropped them into a nice little pot. I even have this is a more decorative pot on the outside with a nice little plastic pot on the inside. So I can be a little bit more versatile with what I was doing. I was able to take it out, water it in certain ways. And I put a plastic baggie on top. I know it's not that pretty, but for a while I had a plastic baggie on top of this little stems inside this pot. It didn't look like very much. And I would come back every couple of days or honestly every couple of weeks And I'd see all these little leaves growing inside of it. And I was so excited when I removed that plastic bag to have such an amazing little polka dot begonia. And all these little stems are all ready to go and growing. And they were able to grow into a bigger plant. And I think a few of them even flowered recently. So it is a showing that there is a success rate with some of these that is pretty great. You don't always have a complete success rate. You will definitely have plants that will they'll die back. The cuttings won't make it. They won't root. All that kind of stuff can happen. It's all a bit of a numbers game. So I think in general, if you're doing a propagation for a plant, go a little bit excess, propagate more of them because you probably lose somewhere between 20 to 50% of your cuttings if depending on the system and depending on the plant. All right. And now I would like to talk about another one of my most amazing plants that I really love is the Ficus elastica taniki. So this is a beautiful, it's the largest plant in my room. It's going all the way up to the ceiling. And the thing was, it kept on hitting my ceiling. And as it hits the ceiling, it starts to kind of turn and crinkle and it doesn't look that good. And I was like, oh, you're not getting light up there. I need to do something. I need to do something. So I decided, okay, we're going to propagate this. We're going to see how this goes. And so what I did is I came in and I chopped off large sections from the top of the plant. It hurt my soul a little bit. It was hard, but I did it. And I cut off the large section and I was able to cut them up into smaller pieces, put them into some water. I have one right here, still going. If you can see me, it's probably pretty small. But I have these large stems in water that I was using a little bit of tap roots every once in a while. And I was just hoping, please root before you die. And all of them did. It was wonderful. A couple things about ficuses in general. They do have a latex sap inside their root cell or inside their stem cells. So not stem cells, but their cells throughout their stems. And that is something that is a bit of an irritant. It can also stain. It's something that will come out in a large amount right when you cut it. So when you are cutting a ficus in general, just be a little bit careful. I will have some paper towels or something on the side to dab the top just to stop any of the excess growth or excess spilling out of the latex sap. Because if it gets on your floor, it's not fun to clean up. I then had these longer stems, of course. And what I did for that is I chopped them up into pretty large pieces. And the thing about a ficus is, although it is a tree that has a bit more of an older growth root system, they are incredibly fast at growing roots. They are very good at it. You can even see all the way down the stem. It's a little bit hard to see in this picture, but there are little kind of, looks like little growth points all throughout the stems of the plant that are just like little nubs. Those are all little roots that are ready to grab moisture out of the air because they are these tropical kind of plants that love to grow in a high moisture, high humidity area. And so they grow roots very quickly. So I was not worried about these larger stem cuttings actually rooting. Right down here, I have a showing of the 4 from one of my propagations for this. There are 2 older growths, so lower down on the stem cut, and 2 newer growth ones. And you can see there is a large quantity difference of root growth on the ones that are the newer, the younger, greener stems root much faster across the board than older, more woodier growth stems. So if you were ever taking a cutting from a rose or a larger tree or a ficus or some sort of plant that actually has a bit more of a trunk or a bit more of a barky stem, then you want to make sure that you're taking younger growth cuts or you're just understanding that there is a lot slower rate of root growth from those more woodier, older growth points. So here's a nice representation, this left one and this middle one right here, a lot more roots growing than to the woodier ones on the side. And then I was able to plant it up. Again, it might be hard to see, but I have a pot right here with 4 stems growing from this plant that I cut a couple, maybe 2 years ago, a year ago, and a bunch more ready to be planted up soon. So I'm able to take this large plant that's been sitting in my room, cut it up, make a whole bunch of them. I'm then going to have many ficus trees that I can either give away or have across my house. And the cool thing about it, and I don't have a picture here, is the tree that I cut it from now has multiple branching points because wherever you cut, we talked about this before in a lot of our pruning classes, wherever you cut your tree or your bush or your branch or whatever it is, the nodes or the leaf points or wherever they are, a couple of beneath that cut will start growing out branches. And so now I have a bit more of a tree rather than just 2 stalks in my room. So it's all in all a great system. And I was very happy with the results of this one. So definitely give it a try if you have those large trees. Lots of them can be done by this. All right. And now we're coming to the end. I see the time here, but let's talk really quickly about succulents because it's always good to talk about succulents. They're an amazing plant category that we like to utilize, especially in this kind of area. And I live in California. We have lots of succulents here. Um, they are a plant that can grow a root structure, a plant structure, a leaf structure, anything from almost nothing. It's amazing how fast succulents will actually propagate themselves without you even doing anything. You can cut up a succulent, throw it to the side of the road and not think about it for a while and come back and there'll be roots growing and new stems growing and they try and survive the best they can. They hold their water within their succulentous leaves and root structures and stem structures really well that they actually can when they hold that water for long enough, they're able to use it to actually grow out the new root systems and actually try and survive from whatever system they're in. I have a picture here I just showed. I did a cutting, lots of cuttings. I made a big wreath out of it using moss as my main kind of growing point. So I was just, again, using sphagnum moss and a few other mosses to make it look pretty. Stuck cuttings all throughout it. And that is still in my backyard growing today. It's not as pretty and bright as that because it's been about a couple of years now, but I've actually taken cuttings from that and I even use some in this little arrangement right here. So I just want to give you a quick little storyboard of a arrangement that I made. This pot fell off one of my shelves actually outside. I think my dog might have hit it off the railing. Either way, it fell to the ground and smashed, and I was very sad because I was like, "Oh no, I lost a pot." And then I thought, you know what? This could be kind of cool. I put some soil in it, put the shards of the pottery inside of it. I had cuttings from all over my garden. So from this wreath, from a few other planters, from all over different places in my garden. I just took cuttings one day of everything, let it sit in a nice kind of mildly sunny spot for a couple hours while I did something else, came back. When you take a succulent cutting, it's generally good to let it sit for a little bit of time. You want the stem of it, the very point where you cut it, to callus over a little bit. It'll make it a more successful cutting propagation. But to be honest, you can pretty much take a cutting from a succulent and put it into the ground right away, as long as you're careful with your watering. If you overwater it while it has a open exposed cut, then it can rot from that really easily. But if you let it callus over, or if you don't water it right away, it'll callus over and it'll stop any extra moisture from getting in and ruining the system by rotting it out. And then it just grows. I put these in here in July. Next month, August, I came back and they're all nice and sturdy in there. I couldn't even pull them out. They all had little root systems growing. Some of them started to actually get their growth going on. And then December, a couple months later, you can also see time has passed because I had a English ivy just grow up all over it. But all the different little succulents started growing in. And it really is interesting to watch, especially in these like multi-clustered arrangements. Some plants are faster than others. This beautiful larger echeveria right here, or it might actually be an aeonium. Either way, this larger one grew very quickly. It had a lot of energy in it. It was a bigger system. It had a more robust kind of growth point. And then some of these other ones kind of died back a little bit, and a few of them grew bigger. And it's really interesting seeing that some plants are faster than others, but in general, all of them rooted to one extent or another. And I'm excited to see where this goes. In another year or so, it's probably going to grow out, and I'll take cuttings from that and make another arrangement. All right. I am now towards the end, so if you have any questions, kind of start throwing them into us. But I wanted to show you a whole slew of successful propagations that I've done. These are ones all throughout my house and a few in my outdoor area that I've just taken pieces of plants, either through water, through soil, through sphagnum, some sort of rooting hormone. I've been able to propagate them over a couple of years, and now I have all these amazing, beautiful plants that look store quality, but I've made it from just my backyard. Um, I really, really love a Nepenthes. This is my, I think I actually showcased it in one of my first webinars for Slope Gardens. We did a class about me cutting up and propagating one of these little Nepenthes, and this is the result from that propagation. All these new leaf nodes and all these little pitchers are all new growth from this little cutting system that I did. I have a lipstick plant right here that gets some nice, beautiful little purple on it with some nice little flowers growing out of it, grown from a bunch of cuttings I took from a lipstick plant that was kind of dying away in another room in my house. I have some orchids right here that I produced the kikis on, that the kikis are growing out of this orchid, all these little root systems as they pop off and grow together in some moss. I took succulent cuttings from an oscularia right here, as well as a few monstera ones for the little, I can never remember the name for this one, but it's one of the monsteras. And then even this is a California redwood. That's a little redwood tree right there in my hand, which is beautiful. I took a cutting, a piece of a little redwood tree that I had, grew it in some with some rooting hormone, the rooting powder, and a little bit of moss for a little while, put into a pot, and a couple years later, I have a little tree going. So it just really shows you have a wide variety of plants you can actually propagate. It's quite fun. You have to be just a little bit on top of it, pay attention to what's actually going on, and give them a little bit of time and a little care, a little water, a little fertilizer. You know how it goes. And then that is where we're at. I would love to answer any questions that we have about propagation, or if you have some ideas for other classes, definitely let us know. We have a bunch of other classes on our website. We have a bunch of different kinds of care guides. On our YouTube page, we have all of our classes that we've recorded in the past. Our Instagrams are consistently showing off what we can do, and I was happy to show you my propagation systems.
So fun. This is great, Taylor. Oh my gosh. I learned so much. Totipotent. I learned that word. I didn't know that before. So that's great.
Nice.
Um, we do have some questions. We have a lot of questions coming in. If you could just, because I think there's a couple people, but if you go back to that first slide, because you said that was your favorite plant, and I didn't catch it when you said it, and somebody was asking for the spelling, but it was the one crawling up the pole there.
Yeah, so they're called the Rhaphidophora
That's
hei.
it. Yeah.
Rhaphidophora is a fun name to say, and it's just one of those cool climbing plant species. I don't know how to spell it, sorry. And then hei is like Hayi. And there is a couple of them. There's also the Rhaphidophora decursiva, which is a really beautiful plant if you want to look that one up, which is the dragon tail plant. I've also been growing that and propagating that, but I didn't have any good pictures of it right now, but there's a good amount of these plants out there that I really have been enjoying the past couple of years, and it's one of my favorite plants to grow right now.
That's awesome. Also, is there, I mean, it seems like different plants have different time, like can take a different time in terms of propagation. Like pothos, probably that's really quick. Within like a week or so, you'll start seeing new growth. But then other thing, is there, would you say there's a sort of a range if you are propagating, like if you don't see growth within a month or, whatever, just in general?
Yeah,
Uh,
I
yeah.
think it is a lot of trial and error, of course, and that's why I'm here to at least show you a little of my trial and error. I find that there are absolutely some really amazingly fast growing ones. The pothos, like we were talking about, as one of the example species, really good at propagating, quite easy. They already have root systems already growing, so they're almost ready to go right from the start, and it takes maybe 2 to 3 weeks for it to grow a little bit of a root system that you can plant right away. Or if you let it sit there for 4 or 5 months, you'll actually have a bit of a good sized root system. If you let it sit there for 2 years, it'll probably still be fine. They're very versatile. Another really amazing one right here, I have a Tradescantia. These are another so fast growing plant, and there's a couple of them. There's like the Royal Star, and there's a few other ones that all have this like purple looking leaf to them. They both grow their stems really fast, but they also root very quickly. I can root that plant in maybe 2 weeks or so. It's gonna be very quickly. But then plants kind of like the here, all of our root nodes, let's talk about it. The plants like the Hoyas right here, and there's a few other ones in this area. They're actually a medium speed, I would say. They're maybe looking to about a month or so. You should really start seeing some root growth. It depends on what system you're using. I find that they grow really well in sphagnum moss, which is what I have in this planter box right here, another Hoya right here, and they seem to do really well in these growth containers, and it'll be surprising where I'll think they aren't rooted because nothing seems to be happening. Not many leaves are growing, and I'll try and pull it up, and there's a like 3 inch long root that's just kind of circling itself all inside the soil. So they can be pretty fast within about a month or two, depending on the season. There's so many different variables, so it's hard to give you exact answers, of course. If you have middle of spring to summertime when it's warmer and a lot more light in the air, you will be able to grow faster. If you're in the middle of winter time, then it's going to slow down. So definitely keep that in mind. Also, utilizing growing hormones will speed up the process, as well as a good rate of changing out your water if you're doing water propagation, just to make sure that they are not getting bogged down by other microbes, or if they're getting anaerobic, like no oxygen, then they just can't cell replicate and they can't actually grow as fast. So all these different factors will play into it, but in general, a couple weeks to a couple months is what most cuttings are going to be. If you're not seeing it after a couple months and just like no growth is happening, your leaves are dying back, your system is kind of rotting from itself, something might have went wrong and the cutting is probably not viable anymore. If you can harvest it or like cut it back, you might be able to get it going. But a lot of times you kind of have to take your losses and try it again with something else. You know, not everything works out. Not every cutting I make will grow roots on it. Again, with the I have our Ficus taniki down here was a very slow propagation time, and I was totally fine with that. I knew it, they grow roots pretty quickly. They started fast, but they've been in that water for a little while and they're still pretty small root systems, so it doesn't seem to like robustly grow that quickly. But I bet if I planted that into some soil with some fertilizer, the plant would get going right away.
Well, I guess sort of a follow-up to that would be like what is the ideal temperature and light that you would be propagating in?
Yeah. In most cases, and again, not all, but most cases, you'd like the temperature that you're comfortable with in our house is what we always talk about for houseplants in general. So that's somewhere, I'm not great with temperature, so I can't give you too great of a number, but probably in the
Like
60s to
65,
70
yeah.
range. Yeah, 60 to
Hmm.
70 range is like you're comfortable. You can be in a t-shirt in your house, but you're not over hot or not super cold. Most plants are pretty happy in that range. Some are a little bit more versatile and they can be in different ones. Generally in a bright, maybe like east facing or sometimes south or west facing window, but east facing window is probably your best one just because it has that morning sun that can really get the plant going, but then it kind of shades out by the end of the day when the sun gets a little bit hot. That's one of the best growing systems for most plants, and propagations would be very similar. I also think that having them, they don't need a lot. They don't have a huge root system. They don't need a lot of sun all at once. So having them on a counter farther away from your window or a little bit in a different spot be totally fine. They would actually grow pretty well there. So you don't have to worry too much as long as you are keeping an eye on it and there is some light going through that room. It's not just a dark corner. So yeah.
Do you ever use like heat mats or put them on top of the refrigerator or something like that?
Oh, I haven't. I've definitely heard that as a tactic to use. I think the warmth in many of these more tropical plants is good for the root system. I think you can be too much, so be careful of that. But a lot of the heat mats that are sold on the market, we even have some at our stores, are pretty good to not like overheat your plant. It'll help with the initial root system growing. It's also really good for seed propagation and stuff like that. So it can be helpful. I've heard the tip to put it on top of your fridge for a little bit of heat. It probably depends on your fridge if your fridge actually offsets some heat. And also a lot of times fridges are not really in the best space for lighting. So watch out for that. So it's not the tip I would give, but it's definitely something that could help out. But don't change the more important systems of water and sunlight for a little bit more warmth.
Okay, a ton of questions coming in, which is super awesome because it's everybody's
We don't
super
have a lot of time, sorry,
engaged
y'all.
and inspired. I know. And keep in mind that you can find Taylor Pochron at Sloat Garden Center down by the zoo if you want to go direct and talk with him. And this is being recorded, and the recording will be available, like I said, on Tuesday, the 23rd. Um, and you
I
can
see a
go
couple
back and
questions
rewind.
I can fire through pretty quickly if you want me
Okay,
to answer a little bit. I know we have to
cool.
end pretty soon, but like asking about transplantation, I wanted to talk a lot about transplantation, but I had so much to say I couldn't get into it. In general, if you are transplanting from water into soil, you want to make sure that you are keeping the plant a little bit more hydrated, a little bit more water in that system because it is used to growing in water, and transplanting the soil, the root systems are very different. And so that the root system will actually have a coating on it and all these like structures that are made in the water system so that don't die from too much water. And then when you put it into soil, that system is very different and they need other kinds of capabilities to live in that. So babying it and that initial transplantation time is a little bit more important to kind of watch your plant and learn some techniques for that. Transplanting them from moss, like sphagnum moss to soil is a lot easier. It still has some problems because it is, again, a very more sterile kind of like more water system to a little bit more of a soil system, but the roots are a little bit more set up to have material touching them in that kind of way. So you can actually transplant it pretty easily into soil from that area. And some plants are just better at it than others. And it'll just take a little bit of trial and error for your specific plants to grow. Um, And then there's a question about the question about the ideal time, but also the root length. I think if you can get about 1 inch to 2 inches of root growth, you're pretty much set. If you get more than that, your plant's probably growing. If you go really, really long and it's been water propagating for a long time, that's when that transplantation shock can still happen again. It kind of your plant's set up for this one system and you're changing it to another system. If it's a smaller than like a 1/2 inch or like a really, really small little root system, it can be transplanted, but that plant is still in a bit of a critical state where it can fail pretty easily. So you have to be a little bit more careful. That's why I find it's really helpful to have those propagation boxes where you can see the roots on the bottom, or if you have a jar of water and the roots are growing, you can actually just see the roots and know when to transplant it. Other than that, there's a wide variety of times you can do between transplantation because the plant's just growing. It's living in that water. Do it when you can. It has to be on your schedule. The plant is, living under your roof, so you have to make sure that it's working with you on your schedule as well. And then I know we had some questions about some more sexual propagation as well as germination slides. I know we have some good classes on seed propagation or seed growing in general, and germination is very interesting. It's a topic that is a little bit more um, for outdoor growth, and it depends on what we want to talk about there. And one question was, do I spray water on my cuttings? And I spray water on all my plants. I like to mist my plants. I am one who will do that. I know it's not perfectly the most amazing thing you can do in some cases, but in general, I find that adding some humidity to my room, going up and watering my plants with some water, misting my cuttings or my anything that's growing, I actually pay attention to them a little bit more, and I can find diseases and bugs faster when I'm actually interacting with them with that kind of misting time. Yeah, I'm kind of running through. Is there any more questions that you saw I should answer right away?
Um, hmm, Standing water, like in the containers, do you ever kind of dump out any standing water in the clear containers?
I think a general method is dump out about 2/3 of it and keep in about 1/3 of your water. That I used to say dump out all of it and refresh everything, but I've been finding recently a lot of talk about the plants producing their own rooting hormones for the system. So leaving in a little bit of water and have their own natural rooting hormones still within the system, it will probably be more successful as the propagation goes forward. So I jump about 2/3 and I'd fill up the rest of it. Or if the water gets really low because I forget about it for a while, which happens, I just fill up and you're good to go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, this has been super fun. I think it's really intriguing because it's kind of like a science lab experiment sort of cool thing to do. And so, I mean, to Taylor's point, there's a lot of sort of trial and error and sort of working out what will work for you and not, but it's fun. I mean, it's fun. Just try it. I even think this would be great with kids and setting up a little shelf with different clippings of stuff and like see what takes off faster. You could just kind of just have fun with it.